Begin by drawing your attention to an historical paradox. In the 19th century, people were fighting for democracy. They were marching down streets for the vote. They were singing songs about democracy. There was a huge promise of an emancipatory future in which everybody would have a vote and a voice. And the ruling elites of the 19th century almost universally resisted that call for democracy. At the beginning of the 21st century, it is almost exactly the opposite. Governing elites proclaim and promote what they call democracy with every breath they've got, each of them competing with the next one to appear more like a democratic government. But people, in streets, workplaces, are increasingly disengaging from what they see as the game of democracy, which appears to be something that is snaring them in to a process of being governed, manipulated, and ultimately left out of account. And it's a remarkable transformation from this 19th century moment when democracy was the great hope. It had this not only rhetorical appeal, but a very strategic appeal to millions of people, as indeed it has in more recent times in other countries. And now when it has become seen as a frustration, a disappointment, a part of officialdom. And I want to try to explain how that transformation has taken place and what we might do about it. And I think there are four reasons for this transformation from democracy as hope to democracy as business as usual. First of all, increasingly, what is referred to as democratic politics has pushed the majority of people out into the periphery of real decision making. And we only have to look around over the last few weeks to see how that has happened. Over the last few weeks we have seen this seismic spasm within the banking system. The international capitalist market has faced its biggest instability in over half a century. Massive and long-term consequences for all of us. Huge consequences of bad planning, corruption, greed. And the sole policy response to that has been the biggest single redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich that we've seen in centuries, probably in the history of capitalism. The $700 billion voted by Congress today only actually a part of the process of rewarding people for incompetence, for negligence, and for social disregard. And so it seems to me that if you are thinking as a member of the public, do I have a say in how society is run? Where was that say when that vital moment of crisis occurred? There is no say. The American public have no say. Both of the candidates likely to win the American election support what has been referred to until today, incidentally, as the bailout. Incidentally, the Financial Times this morning has said it would be a good idea not to call it a bailout. It's bad publicity. It's bad publicity because it's accurate publicity. And it isn't only this crisis that we've seen over the last few weeks. Think of the biggest war that has afflicted our generation, an illegal war incidentally, which tore up international law, where people walked into another country, exercised actions of torture contrary to anything that has been ever accepted since the days of the Nuremberg trials. A war that will go on for all of our lifetimes and probably for the next generation. Absolutely no democratic decision was made by the public, and insofar as the public did stated opinion, it was regarded as peripheral and irrelevant. So the first reason for this transformation, for this frustration, for this disappointment, is that people are right. They look back at the modest opportunities they have to use their votes, their voices, their bodies to change anything, and they see that it's always on the periphery, it's never at the centre of real decision making. The second reason for this transformation, I would argue, is that we live in a chronically underinformed society. We live in a society where there is a structural organisation for the perpetuation of ignorance, and we call that the mass media, where over the years it has become a default position of the media that people are either cognitively unable to understand complexities, or that they are psychologically unable to take reasonable collective action with one another. And so every newspaper editor I've ever interviewed, every broadcaster I've ever interviewed has given me the same answer. People don't want to get involved in politics. People don't want to do anything. What we have to do is appeal to people on the basis of very narrow and parsimonious notions of their consent or their rejection of consent. And it is a complete misunderstanding of what people are really like. People are, and have to be in a democracy, the first and best judges of what is good for their life. And if they're not, then the notion of democracy becomes absolutely vacuous. Because the one principle of democracy that has to be sustained, if this is to have any kind of meaning, is that nobody understands what is in the interest of the people better than the people themselves. That is the first principle. And it is a principle that is disregarded, certainly by the mainstream mass media, and to a very great extent by educational institutions as well. The third reason for this disenchantment with democracy over the last 100 or so years is the absence of any real space for democratic action. And that's incidentally one of the reasons why I'm so pleased to be here today, and I favour this initiative of Leeds Student Union, because we don't have any spaces to do democracy, to set agendas, to work out ideas, to compete with one another over what we really think is right, to plan actions. We don't have them. I can take you around Leeds and I can show you 20 places to put a bet on a horse. At least half a dozen places to go and see lap dancing. I can take you to a place in the library where you can read about democracy and democratic spaces in ancient Greece, but I cannot present to you a place which is the space of democracy, because it doesn't exist. And usually when spaces don't exist, that is because authorities assume that there is no need for them, and that if they did exist, they would be disruptive. We don't have what the political philosopher Hannah Arendt referred to as the space of appearance, where we can stand before one another and become a public. And if you have a democratic culture without that, then it is nothing more than a nominal democratic culture. But even if you were to rectify those three absences, the absences of the demos being at the centre of democracy, the absence of the information that we need to make wise judgments, the absence of the spaces we need to come together as a public, even if you were to fill those gaps, there is a fourth reason for the demise of a democratic culture in this and other countries, and that is that democracy, if it means anything at all, has to mean that you make a difference with your voice, with your action, with your votes. And if you ask most people in this country, do any of those things make a difference? Can you make a difference? They will answer no. Political scientists have a word to describe this feeling, which we call efficacy. Efficacy describes people's belief in their ability to influence the world around them. Something between 70 and 80% of people in every survey that I've ever read or conducted since the 1980s agrees with the statement, there is nothing I can do to change the way the world is run.